Okay, so Payday 2 is known for a lot of different things. It had great gameplay, a fantastic level of customization, and more achievements than Payday 3 had bugs at launch. But one of the game's most defining things for me personally was its story. Now, I'm an absolute sucker for the Lovecraftian direction Payday 3's narrative took with the introduction of The Secret and everything leading up to the White House heist, but even before then, the game's more grounded storylines kept me hooked as well. The introduction of the dentist and setup for the return of Hoxton was fantastic. Once Hoxton returned, he didn't just bring with him one of the best heists in the game, but the start of a revenge story that would span the next couple of months, culminating in the Hoxton revenge heist. The dentist was such an interesting character to speculate around and eventually learn more about, and there was something quite visceral about eventually getting to take out the rat, Hector. And that's why when Payday 3's story was set up from day one as a good old-fashioned revenge story on the people who tried to take out the gang, pulling them back kicking and screaming into the world of heisting from which they had hung up their masks and turned their backs to many years prior, I was in. There was nothing at the time that Payday 3 could have done to get me more excited for the game. Learning that there was an assassination attempt on the gang immediately got me interested to find out what happened and who might have fell foul to these assassination attempts. While I had assumed that our core 4 heisters would have survived, what did this mean for the other characters like Jiro, Sangres, Rust, and our contractors like Vlad and Locke and so on and so forth? Especially as some of these characters in Payday 2 were crossover characters that were unlikely to return in Payday 3, it would only make sense for them to have been taken out by these assassins. Then the Follow the Money trailer released, and we got a first-hand look at the type of characters the Payday Gang had become in the years since we last saw them. This was a far more brutal and aggressive take on the gang. They were exceptionally forceful in their heist on the Golden Shark Bank, not just giving the guards a beatdown, but kicking civilians to the ground as well with absolutely no remorse. One of the more infamous shots from this trailer is of course Hoxton stamping on the hand of an elderly woman as she reached out to grab some cash. But the gang also didn't hesitate to employ tactics like using human shields when facing down the cops, getting 2 guards killed in the process. I was so ready to explore a brutal revenge story with this much more cold-blooded version of the gang, as one of the things this trailer excellently showcases is that at the end of the day, the Payday Gang are not the good guys of the story. They are hardened criminals that are going to get away with the loot and have no issue taking down anybody who stands in their way. And then the day came, Payday 3's release day, and the story was, well, none of these things. It wasn't brutal, it wasn't really a revenge story, and it wasn't all that interesting, to be completely honest with you. I, like many others, anticipated twists and turns and betrayals and returning characters left, right, and center. Surely, if there was a coordinated attack on the entire gang, someone had to have been working with the enemy, right? We had this new mysterious handler named Shade. She claims to have been an associate of Bane, but surely, given how long the gang worked with the man in the chair, she would have come up. Dallas is apparently familiar with her, but would that really be enough to convince the rest of the gang that she's trustworthy? Early on, there's a cutscene between Hoxton, Wolf, and Chains where they discuss Shade, and initially I thought this was the game's way of planting a seed of doubt in the player's mind about whether or not she can be trusted. Does this mean that there's more to Shade than meets the eye? Unfortunately not. This cutscene goes absolutely nowhere, so essentially just boils down to exposition. Although we have just learned that Shade coordinated with Beckett to go off-grid, so maybe Shade's true identity is one that the gang would be more familiar with, but I highly doubt that the storyline is going there. There's also Pearl, the gang's newest member, but again, she has served no narrative purpose so far, not in the base game or its first year of DLCs. We have learned a little bit about her thanks to the Dragon Files ARG website, but nothing really all that interesting. So, other than a disappointment, what actually was Payday 3's storyline? A very brief recap of the game's story so far that unfolded over the game's first year, including the launch and Bad Apple campaign, goes as follows. The base 8 heists see the gang gang taking on various jobs that slowly reveal who the conspirators behind the attacks on them are, and at the end of the launch heists, the conspirators are taken out by the person heading up the conspiracy, John Concord, setting him up to be the villain of the Bad Apple campaign. Over the course of the game's first year of DLCs, the gang follow a lead to try and get to Concord, only getting sidetracked as they need to break Houston out of prison before the Bad Apple's narrative culminates in us crippling Concord financially. I believe the assumption is now that he's broke, he's going to take himself out. This relatively straightforward storyline unfolds over the 12 heists in the game that aren't considered side jobs. To be completely honest with you, this story is awful. Basically, nothing of significance happens. There weren't really any impactful twists or turns, and there isn't a single character that goes through any sort of development. They even managed to make the return of beloved characters like Clover and an homage to Hoxton Breakout feel really light narratively. But above all else, as the narrative throughline is that the gang are trying to take out the conspirators that did wrong by them, I think the game fundamentally forgets that the Payday Gang aren't supposed to be the good guys. Sure, as the players, we want to root for them, but I really don't like how the backdrop of everything they do in Payday 3's main storyline is a revenge story that ultimately goes nowhere. John Concord and the conspirators at no point feel like an actual threat to the Payday Gang, so instead wind up feeling like the game's way of justifying what the Payday Gang do. Not a reason, but an excuse. I find it so frustrating that the storyline of some assassins trying to take out the Payday Gang has been completely wasted, as that's a narrative with so much potential. Now, there has been little in the way of story since the end of the Bad Apple campaign. We know that in the first World Bank heist, the gang pissed off the Palatucci crime family, and in the Party Powder heist, we strike against that same family again. But are they actually going to do anything interesting? Will we, at some point down the line, get a figurehead of that crime family for us to view as an antagonist? Either way, I just hope wherever Payday 3's story goes next, it's more interesting than it has been so far. But above all else, I hope that Starbreeze remember that the Payday Gang are not the good guys. I know that in the gameplay we can take human shields, and of course we take out thousands of cops over the course of the campaign, but those actions don't really feel like they match up to the characters we see in Payday 3. At the end of the day, we've got to remember that this Payday Gang used to associate with characters like Bonnie, who is an absolutely deplorable human being. Further to that, even in Payday 3, we've got characters like Jacket. Once again, not exactly the kind of person you want to go for pints with. If you have enjoyed this video, all I ask is that you consider subscribing, and also let me know in the comments section down below if you'd be interested in more lore-focused content from me. Initially, I wanted to propose a rewrite for the game's base narrative in this video, but I didn't really think that it would fit. I am, however, happy to make a dedicated video where I would go through the game's assassination storyline and completely rewrite it from the ground up. In fact, my little concept would actually focus on Hoxton as the main protagonist. Further to that, it might also be fun to go cutscene by cutscene and break down everything that I personally think Payday 3's narrative gets wrong. So if either of those two video ideas sound interesting, please do let me know. Other than that, if you want to hear my thoughts on how well Payday 3's redemption arc is going, now that it's been over a year since it began with the release of the Boys in Blue DLC, you can click the video on screen now. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.